No. So the Climate Resilience Community of Practice, we were formed in 2010. We are then now going on 12 years of being together, which is exciting. We represent all 5 of the Gulf of Mexico states. And within those states, we have a group of practitioners, academia experts, nonprofits, business leaders, local government officials, extension agents, all kinds of different folks. But what we have in common is that we all work on climate and resilience related issues. Those issues have changed over the years. Oftentimes we talk about risk communication and how we can jointly send messages, consistent messages across the Gulf of Mexico about things like sea level rise or precipitation changes or temperature changes. And then we've also had topics that were maybe at the application phase at the local level, such as the community rating system, what to do about saltwater intrusion, how to have better business continuity in your local community. So a variety of topics over those 10 years. And over those 12 years. We typically hold an in-person meeting once a year. We've done that for 10 years. The last 2 years, we have done everything virtual due to the pandemic, but we are super excited in 2022. We're really hoping that things are gonna be on the up and up for us. And we're looking into a September 2022 meeting in person in Sarasota, Florida. So we'll keep everyone apprised of that through the listserv if you're interested in joining us. Anyone is welcome. So as we've grown in different topics, one of the things that has become clear over the past several years is that the Gulf of Mexico has really experienced compounding disasters. So that has been, of course, we have the natural disasters through our, hurricanes that we've all experienced. We have had technological disasters such as the oil spill, and then of course, more recently, biological disasters with the pandemic. These compounding disasters, of course, mean that sometimes we are trying to respond on an individual level at home with what's going on around us, whether it's debris cleanup or checking on loved ones, whatever that might be. But we're also still trying to serve our audiences, and that can be a very challenging situation to be placed in. And so it became very apparent to our larger planning team that we needed to address mental wellness, mental health, in at least on some level. And so just fair warning, none of us are mental health professionals that are going to be facilitating your small breakout groups today. So this isn't intended to be a therapy session, if you will, but what it is meant to do is to try and get us talking about something that is extremely important, as important as our physical health. And we want to know how the Climate and Resilience Community of Practice can provide additional resources on this topic, could potentially hold additional webinars, maybe do a session at our annual meeting in September that really focuses on broad mental health issues so that we can not only take care of ourselves, but also help the people that we serve. So that's how we got to the point that we're at today. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jody Thompson, and she is going to introduce our keynote speaker.
Good morning. I'm excited to introduce Dr. Michelle Crable. Michelle is a youth development specialist and associate professor at the University of Nebraska at Lincoln with the Extension 4-H Youth Development Program. Her work focuses on creating positive youth development environments and youth mental health. She provides professional development training to 4-H youth development professionals, after-school workers, and 4-H volunteers throughout Nebraska and the nation. But not only that, Michelle has been involved with the Extension Disaster Environmental Network, EDEN. And since the flood of 2019, she's been delving more into disaster work and working with mental health and these disaster practitioners. I had the pleasure of meeting Michelle at the EDEN conference this year and listening to her presentation. So I'm really glad that she was able to join us today. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you, Jody. And I am super excited to be here. I wish I could be joining you in person. According to my phone, it's a balmy 6 degrees in Lincoln, Nebraska today. So the Gulf states sound like a delightful place to be. So Sarasota, Florida is sounding really good. I'll just be honest. I will say this, I am a farm kid from Kansas. So I don't get coasts. Large body of waters kind of escaped me. That was the man-made pond out in the pasture. So I'm really excited to do this work for you. I grew up in Tornado Alley. That's kind of my introduction to disaster work, having done a lot of tornado cleanup as a child and as a young adult. So that's partly fueled my interest in working with disasters. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. A couple of things I want to say before I get started. One is I am not an expert on this. I know enough maybe to be dangerous, and hopefully I can facilitate the conversation today. I arrive at this topic for a couple of reasons, one of which is that this topic was something I was thinking about before we had the flood of 2019. I was feeling overwhelmed, I was feeling stressed, and we know what that's like in extension. And then the other reason, so I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. And so I hope today that we have a conversation about this topic, because this is an extremely important. Not only is this topic important before the pandemic really compounded some things. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And hopefully you're seeing my title, which is How Do I Let Some Steam Out of the Pressure Cooker? And I say that because I started Extension as a county extension agent in Kansas. And one of the jobs I got to do, and some of you may be familiar with this, was testing pressure cookers. And so we had that job every spring, summer to test people's pressure cookers to make sure that they were safe to use. And over the last few years, I've really thought about how do I let some of that steam out so I don't explode. And there are times it feels like fairly close to hitting the boiling part or hitting the part where it's not going to be good. And some of you may be able to relate to that. What I'm going to have you do next is I want you to finish the two statements. I'll have you type in the chat box this first statement, extension work is. So I want to hear your thoughts about what you think about doing extension work is like for you. Ooh, we've got some great responses. Keep them coming. Great responses. So I won't read all of them, but what I think is really interesting is the responses you put in here. Fast paced. I love the one about spinning several plates at once. I think that's a great response. Different every day. So you talk about the variety. That's one of the reasons I stay in extension. Service orientated, working with your community, always changing, promoting, never ending. These are great. A calling, absolutely. So then I want you to respond to the next statement, doing disaster response and recovery work is. And again, just type in the chat box. again, really good responses here. Steve, I'm gonna maybe end it here just for the sake of time, because I want us to make sure we have enough time to have conversation. I really like your statement about critical to meet our service mission, which I think is absolutely true. You know, here physical exhausting, but also rewarding. The next slide I'm going to show is I asked myself this question, and I wrote down some random thoughts. And I thought about this over the course of my extension career, not only here at Nebraska, but also in Kansas. And here were some of my responses or my thoughts about extension work. And I would also say that extension work and disaster work really are kind of one and the same for me. They're also what you said. I find it tough. Sometimes I find it isolating and lonely. It's certainly tiring. Can it be impactful? Somebody talked about it being your calling. It's demanding, it's important. Sometimes you face scrutiny if you're in a county, you didn't do things right, your policies aren't the way somebody wants to go. It can be stressful, exhausting. We very much came up with the same list: fulfilling, needed, difficult, essential. I could probably list other ones, but the reason why I had you do this, and the reason why I shared my list, is sometimes I think it is just nice to hear my colleagues say they are experiencing the same things. So it's nice to hear someone say, yes, extension work is intense. I totally get it. Or yes, this is exhausting. And that validation of feelings can be so, so helpful. We'll talk more about the importance of connectedness, but I really wanted us to really just call out some of these feelings we have around our work. And it's really nice to hear colleagues say, I feel the same way too. And for me, hearing that takes a little bit of steam out of the pressure cooker. I think the other thing that is challenging, and I'm going to keep picking on Steve here because I see his response in the chat box, is this idea about our mission. And one of my colleagues and I were having this conversation about feeling overwhelmed and some of this, and she said, the problem is, Michelle, is that we are too dedicated to the mission, and we will do whatever it takes to get the mission done. And I have thought a lot about that statement. What does it mean to be dedicated to this mission? We feel a calling, we feel a sense of dedication to our communities, loyalty, it's a value. We value maybe social justice, we value helping our neighbor and building communities, but sometimes that can get tiring. It can also get in the way of us taking care of ourselves. And so I want us to think about how we are dedicated to the mission of the land grant or the Sea Grant institutions, because I think that's an important thing for us to be retrospective and think about. The other thing I really want to do, and we could spend so much time on this, but I'm going to try not to be too boring with this, because again, I want you to have enough time to have some conversation. But these are terms that often come up when talking about this topic. And when I first met with Tracy and Joy, and I can't remember who else was on that call, but when we talked about doing this webinar, what was the term we want to use? Is it mental health? We could throw around mental illness, we could throw around mental wellness. And so I've been spending the last couple of months thinking about that. What's the term we really want to use? So here are some definitions. One is from the feds, the US government, how they define mental health, which is the first one. Mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. It affects how we think, feel, and act. It also helps determine how we handle stress, relate to others, and make choices. Okay, that's one definition. The World Health Organization says mental health is the foundation for the well-being and effective functioning of individuals. It's more than the absence of a mental disorder. It's the ability to think, learn, and understand one's emotions and the reactions of others. So there's another thing to think about. And then the American Psychological Association gives us a definition about mental illnesses. Mental illnesses are health conditions involving changes in emotion, thinking, or behavior, or a combination of these things. Mental illnesses are associated with the stress and or problems functioning in work or in social, work, and family activities. The term that we kind of arrived on, and I think the term that makes most sense for extension professionals is the term either mental wellness or emotional wellness. If we look at the National Institutes of Health, they define mental wellness as emotional wellness is the ability to successfully handle life stresses and adapt to change in difficult times. In this PowerPoint, which I will send to you, or it will be sent to you, you'll have availability of the copy. There is a link. The National Institution of Health has an emotional wellness kit. It's somewhat helpful. It may be something for you to think about, but I do want you to know there's some resources on NIH's website. The other definition I found was emotional wellness refers to an awareness, understanding, and acceptance of our feelings and our ability to manage effectively through challenges and change. And I kind of like that definition that came out of the National Center for Emotional Wellness by Dr. Mark Lerner. And I thought that was interesting. What I really think we're talking about in extension, as Tracy pointed out, we are not therapists. I am not a therapist. When I've had conversations with therapists about what's extension's role, I really think our role is in some of the prevention pieces. And I'm going to give you some examples of how we might work with that. But those are some definitions that I think are important for us to look at. This next slide is a bunch of just other terms. In the last 2 years with the pandemic, we've heard lots of other terms associated with mental wellness or mental health issues. We've heard terms like resiliency, secondary trauma, stress, coping skills, overwhelmed, compassion fatigue, disaster stress, burnout, self-compassion, stress. A new one I just heard, and this was coming out of the public school or out of K-12 fields, was moral injury, was a new one I haven't heard before. We could spend all the rest of the time talking about these definitions. I don't want to. If you want more information about them, I'd be more than happy to share that with you. But I want to make sure we have plenty of time for conversation. Simply, I will define a couple of them. We've heard a lot about resiliency. The simple definition of resiliency for me is our ability to bounce back. So if you think about that mental wellness and emotional wellness, it's really talking about how do we bounce back after an adverse experience. I'm going to move through these fairly quickly because I want us to have enough time with the conversation. Compassion fatigue, this Charlie Figley is really, he is one of the kind of gurus of this. And I love the last definition of this is compassion fatigue has been described as the cost of caring for others in emotional pain. And I think this is where our disaster work is really, when you sift through someone's home who's been devastated by a tornado, it's pretty rough. When they don't have any idea where their refrigerator is at, and you're just, everything's in shards. Very vivid memories of cleaning up people's home in a major tornado that hit when I was in college. And so that cost of caring, I think, is really important for us to think about. How do we take on other people's burdens? It's part of that service mission as well. The next one is that I think is really interesting is this Christina Neff, and she used to be at the University of Texas, and I believe she left. Her website's kind of really interesting, but she talks about self-compassion. And simply she says self-compassion involves the acting the same way towards yourself when you're having a difficult time, fail, or notice something you don't like about yourself. Instead of just ignoring your pain with a stiff upper lip mentality, you stop to tell yourself, this is really difficult right now. How can I comfort and care for myself in this moment? If you go to her website, the main piece that pops up, she says, with self-compassion, we give ourselves the same kindness and care we'd give to a good friend. And to me, that's really important because sometimes I think we're our own worst critic. And so I find her work really kind of interesting. What does it mean to give us that same care that we would give a good friend? If it's a good friend who's just experienced a trauma, how would we treat them? And then let's think about treating ourselves in the same way. There's a couple of pieces I want to talk real quickly about. Again, we could spend more time on this. But one of my frustrations with a lot of discussion around mental health and even mental wellness is it's an either, especially mental health really over mental wellness, is it's an all or nothing. It's very binary. You either are doing fantastic or you need to be institutionalized. And I'm like, wait a minute, there's got to be some in between here. When I think about my physical health, if I think I'm getting a cold, I maybe sleep more, I maybe eat better, I may take some over-the-counter medications if I have a headache. And you know what, I can kind of get myself out of it, right? And I think that is true with mental health. Even when I'm feeling a little down or a little blah, talking with a friend. Sometimes maybe it's getting more sleep because I've worked a long day the day before. Maybe it's taking a break and engaging in a hobby that I love. Maybe it's simply just taking myself for a walk. But if I'm feeling a little blue, if I'm feeling a little bit out of sorts and my mental wellness is not great, I can kind of do these things to get out of it. And so what I really want to emphasize is that I don't think mental health and mental wellness is this, it's either you're fantastic or you're going to commit suicide or you're going to be needs to be institutionalized. There is a lot in between. And I'm going to show you a piece from Canada here in the next slide that I think will be helpful. Dr. Corey Keyes from Emory University talks about things in flourishing and language terms. And this came out in about 2002, high mental health versus low mental health. This is his model. The next model I'm going to give you, which I think is a little bit more helpful from a practitioner's perspective, is this mental health curriculum out of Canada. And this was done by their Mental Health Commission of Canada. What I like about this one is we can kind of all relate to this. We see this green section of healthy. We see the next section, which is reacting. We see an injured, which I think is interesting language. And then we see ill. And where we're at is there's some days I may be really healthy and there's some days I may be reacting. What we want to have happen is that we stay in that healthy reacting kind of that green and light green areas. If we have enough trauma, enough other issues, maybe there's some biological pieces that come into play, we may go over into the injured and ill. And that's if we're in the injured or ill place is where we do need to seek professional counseling, professional help. And that help can be take place in a lot of different ways. And so what I want us to think about is kind of this healthy reacting piece. Kind of you can look at it and kind of take assessment of it for yourself, but then also think about it for your colleagues. And I think this is the space, and I've had some conversations with some therapists about this is the space where I think extension can work, is helping people deal with normal mood fluctuations, helping build resiliency, helping people become physically and be socially active, helping with sleep patterns. You can see that, limiting alcohol, working to reduce addictive behaviors. So this, for me, this continuum makes a lot of sense because it's not an all or nothing. There are some days I'm more into the reacting and maybe even injured. The challenge is that you don't want to get stuck in the injured. If you stay in the injured, that's when you may need to see out some professional help. The next slide is simply thinking about your mental wellness. And I took this training done by the United States Department of Education, and it was really good. They talked about it in these domains, and wellness is often talked about in various domains. I wanted to give you those domains that this training that I attended, because it was interesting to me. They talked about it: physical, intellectual, environmental, emotional, financial, social, spiritual, and occupational. And the new ones to me were the issues of financial. What's my financial wellness? And the reason I think that becomes important is, for some of us, shopping is a coping skill. And if your finances are not in order, that can also cause you stressors, and you can also use it as a coping skill. Pieces around social and spiritual were interesting to me. And then the piece about occupationally. Occupationally, am I happy in my job? Is my job a toxic work environment? What are things happening with me occupationally? Am I challenged in my job? Is my job bringing me fulfillment? Again, we could spend, I have a whole activity that we could do over an hour. If I were in person, I would push to have this done. We could talk about this, but I just wanted you to know the different domains. And I realize I'm kind of going through all of this quickly, again, because I want to have enough time for you to go into breakout rooms and talk about this. But here's a question that I have for you, as I've quickly done this, is what do you need from? And I have this list here. What do you need from your family? What do you need from your community? What do you need from your colleagues? What do you need from your work supervisor? And then lastly, what do you need from yourself to maintain mental wellness or emotional wellness? And originally I was going to have you type in the chat box, but I think I'm just going to let you sit with this a little bit and have you think about, what do I need from my family? What do I need from my community? And community can be a variety of things. It can be your bowling league. It can be a faith community. It can be your physical community. It can be a hobby group. What do I need from my colleagues? What do I need from my supervisor? And then I also think about, what do I need from myself? So these are really important questions to ask. And I think reflection is really an important part of emotional and mental wellness. So I'll have you think about that. Maybe you can discuss this in your breakout groups. But again, I want to make sure we have enough time for that. The next slide is a little different slide. These are some of my having looked at this for 2 years, because I've been doing some training with Nebraska Extension. I've been looking and reading on being overwhelmed. I've read Brene Brown's work on vulnerability and some of her work on various emotions, which she is a great author, good person to look at. One of the things, and there was actually an interesting study that came out the end of last year that said, basically, employee wellness programs don't work. And it was a really interesting article about sleeping more, eating better, and getting more exercise isn't the bullet answer. And I thought, wow, somebody said that out loud. Somebody found those results. And I thought that was really, really interesting. Because if it were as simple, if dealing with compassion fatigue, if dealing with burnout, if dealing with stress was just as simple as sleeping more, eating better, and exercising, we all know that, right? I think about the days when I was a school teacher and I was working literally 80 hours a week. I couldn't, when was I supposed to sleep more? When was I supposed to find the time to make a good meal? And those things feel like I just can't do it. And someone just, thank you for typing that in the chat box about sleeping more can be difficult when you're so stressed. And I completely agree. This advice about sleeping more, eating better, and getting more exercise, I know it. So my thoughts today are a little bit different. I will say this. I mean, I used to teach nutrition. I get that I should eat the apple over McDonald's fries, but you know what? Those McDonald's fries are really good. And some days I just want that comfort. I will admit a cupcake is so much more satisfying than an apple. And so I know that I should do it, but I don't. So my little bit of advice for you today is a little bit different. It's not going to be, sleep, eat better, and exercise. Here's my advice. Use your voice and be assertive. And what I mean by that is this may be about setting your own boundaries. I am not going to do email after 7 o'clock or 6 o'clock or whatever you say you're going to do. I'm not going to do emails on weekends. So that is one part of it. I also think we need to call out toxic work environments. If you feel like the demands of your supervisor or administration is too much, call them out on it. And I'm a firm believer of that. And I realize that's really tricky with power differentials and some of those kind of things. But I really thought a lot about using your voice. Actually, I was on a webinar with Harvard, and they're the ones that said, use that voice in employee wellness and being assertive. Set those boundaries, call out toxic work environments. The next one is using your colleagues and build community. One of the reasons why I chose extension over the traditional academic route was this idea of an extension family. When I got in, started working for K-State Research and Extension, I kept hearing about this wonderful extension family. And you know what? It is a wonderful extension family. And sometimes we forget about that. And that those colleagues, and I'm going to applaud this group, the COP, that's done work on the peer listening. I think that is one of the best things I've seen on the issue of what I would say mental health and mental wellness issues. Because the power of listening to each other is amazing. And I watched my dad do it with his farmer neighbors back at home in South Central Kansas. I see myself do it in conversations I have in the hallways. And I don't ever want to, I think that the power of picking up the phone or FaceTiming or texting your colleagues saying, how are you doing? How did the presentation go? How did that whatever go? That is really important. And don't forget to use your extension colleagues. I also think it's important to build community around whatever brings you joy and whatever brings you really in some ways hope. I still think about the old Cheers song. Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name and they're always glad you came. Wouldn't it be nice to get away? And that to me is what community can do for you. I have a great community. I'm a quilter, one of these obsessive quilters, and my community has been really, really helpful for me. And then the last one I got when I did the Fed's training about how was I going to improve my self-care, and somebody said, use vacation time. And I thought, that's it. The University of Nebraska has fantastic vacation time. We get 2 days a month. I'm always getting notifications saying, you know what, you need to use your time or you're going to lose it, because we cap at a certain amount. And it was so insightful. And that's a very, very simple thing, is to use vacation time. Take a day off, and don't take a day off and then work 8 hours doing email because you need to get that email done. So that's a part about kind of giving yourself permission to really use vacation time. I will also say that using vacation time is also about taking some just taking a time out. Sometimes when I find myself in that injured category on the continuum, I just need to place myself in timeout. And sometimes that's a walk. Sometimes that's not, maybe going home early, but I need to do that. So the point about vacation time is just taking some time for yourself. And here I was on a webinar, national webinar, last week, and it was about teacher wellness. And so I was trying to see if I had any news sites, but I modified this line from them. The bottom line is when extension professionals thrive, children, youth, families, and communities thrive. And that's what we're really for. Our emotional wellness will make our jobs, if we are emotionally well, we will do better in our jobs, and we will do better to the people we're serving. And then the last piece is there is a Reach Out for Wellness website that I was a part of. Dr. Holly Hatton Bowers was the lead PI. It was a USDA grant. This has a disaster recovery self-assessment. It's also got, there's a toolkit. This is the link. It will take you, kind of the first thing you see on the website is you will see a toolkit for the assessment, as well as some short little courses that you can take to work with this area of wellness and self-care for people who do work in disaster recovery situations. And then lastly, here's my contact information. And I've probably gone on way too long. I'm going to shut it off here, and we could quickly, have some questions. And I just see somebody's typing in the chat box, talking about scheduling vacation days at the beginning of the year. Very good tactic. And certainly you can't take vacation when you're 6 feet under. So I think that's an important piece. Any quick questions before we go into breakout rooms? Thank you for your attention.